Affirmative action is a legal concept, and it is proscribed as a legal concept in terms of it's limited as a legal concept. Title VII said you can't discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, gender, national origin. Title VII has as a part of the section that deals with judicial remedies, what a court can do if you are found to have discriminated. It says, it names some things, back pay, front pay, and at the end it says, and other such affirmative relief as the court shall deem necessary. Okay? That affirmative relief will depend on what needs to be done based on the circumstances in that particular place. The guy that I told you about that said that is not the same as the guy who said that about to my MBA student. He may have discriminated in a way that was totally different than the person who said, oh my God, I feel so bad because I've discriminated against these people all this time and I didn't even know it because of something in my head that I didn't know. They could have dealt with it very different ways. So the court couldn't just tell you, do this. It had to leave courts anyway based on the facts that were in front of them. Okay. But this was not affirmative action as people were used to thinking about it. That came out of Executive Order 11246. Now, Executive Order 11246 is an executive order that was decades old, I think about 60 years old, undone by Trump, that said if you are doing business with the federal government, and this was passed, the idea is that they want to be a good role model. So the idea was, if we're going to say you can't discriminate in the workplace, we should be the ones who are showing that. Okay, we're going to lead the way on this. So we're going to have this executive order that says that if you're doing business with us, then we don't want you to discriminate in your workplace. But that was basically it. I mean, it said if you do business with the federal government of $50,000 or more, I don't care whether it's coming in to do consulting or coming in to provide the toilet paper for the bathrooms. Okay, if you have a contract with the federal government for $50,000 or more, then you are required to sort of, I'm going to put it this way, sort of take a snapshot of your workplace. And there are 7 categories in the law that workplace positions are divided into. So you have clericals, you have people who clean up, you have your C-suite type people, 7 different categories. You sort of take a picture and you say, who's in these positions? And if it looks like it's out of whack, you have, 100% men in your top executive positions. You have 100% women in your clerical positions. You have 100% Blacks in your janitorial positions. But the area that you're drawing from has people who could fit into all of those categories, totally qualified to be there, but none are there. It's going to look kind of strange. Okay. So once you take that snapshot, if you see that, things are kind of wacky, we want you to set up some goals for what you should reach for, given who you can have in your workplace. That is, who's available where you're drawing your people from. If it's local, who's available local. If it's statewide, who's available statewide that fits into these qualifications. And the SMSA does that for you. That information is available. It'll tell you how many college graduates that are in your area, how many people qualify to be doctors, that sort of thing. So you look at that, you see, wow, this is kind of weird. We've got 35% people who are qualified to be in our C-suite, and we don't have any in the C-suite. So it's not that we don't have them. Something is happening that makes it so they're not making it to our C-suite. So you're going to set up now, because you have a contract with the federal government to provide goods or services of $50,000 or more. Wait a minute, which means that does not deal with every employer. Okay, that's important because people started taking it as a general thing. It never was general. It was only people who dealt with the federal government in terms of having a contract with them of $50,000 or more. Very small part of the work population. So if you have that, you're going to take a snapshot, you're going to shoot for some goals, put some goals up about what you think you need to be shooting for based on who's available. And you're also going to set some timetables so we're not looking at this 50 years from now saying, yep, that was our goal. And like, we're working on it. Okay, you set timetables, and your timetables would be able to be adjusted based on the realities of what you were dealing with. If you had a whole bunch of people leave at some point, you're going to have more spaces available to fill than you would at some other point. If you didn't have any spaces available, nobody was leaving. They just loved where they were working. You didn't have any spaces available. So, you couldn't fill them and move towards your goal. That was the idea of affirmative action.
Longtime Jewish community activist Randy and his wife Caroline Gold are determined to prevent Jewish genetic diseases. The Golds are the catalyst behind the creation of JScreen.org and fight to find a cure for their daughter Eden's disease through their leadership of ML4.org. As a visionary professional, Randy is a former president and chairman of the professional services industry. Randy steered 300% revenue growth, tripling shareholder value. His national relationships with real estate investors and developers and their acquisition, construction, and reporting groups paved the way for financial due diligence on over $15 billion of acquisitions and annual representation of over $8 billion of real estate projects. A certified public accountant for 20 plus years, Randy led the company to be named Best Place to Work and Fastest Growing Firm in Atlanta. And as a result, he was named to Atlanta's Who's Who. As a recognized leader, Randy is a man with great professional responsibility and the co-founder of multiple efforts to promote genetic education. Randy has maintained a personal history of service to more than 15 organizations throughout his career. Randy has been recognized by multiple organizations over his career: Atlanta's 40 Under 40, Alpha Epsilon Pi Alumni Leadership Award, Jewish Federations of North America Jewish Hero, Georgia Society of CPAs Philanthropy Award, Heritage Society Alumni Leadership Award, Wexner Heritage Foundation Fellow, Association of Jewish Family and Children's Agencies National Leadership Award, and Jewish Federation of Greater Atlanta Young Leadership Award, just to name a few. Welcome, Randy. Let's get to it.
And here we are.
I'm jamming to the intro.
Me too.
I'm glad you like it and that you're jamming to it. That's important.
Yes.
So we're starting today with our special guest star, who's also very, very important to us as a Quilted Hearts. And we're going to explain why that is. So first, we want to say thank you for coming to watch our episode again, Quilted Hearts Chats, where we're stitching together stories of understanding, to deepen understanding. And I want to introduce you to myself, Renee Patterson, and my aunt, Dawn Jean Bennett Alexander.
Hi, everyone. Dawn D. Bennett Alexander here, trying to deal with beating back the ignorance about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, because we don't like the idea that it was on the 20th of January, 2025, totally done away with by executive order, but still very much needed. And the reason we think that that was able to be done is because people simply didn't know what it is. So for every podcast we bring you, our question is always, what does blank have to do with DEI? Because it shows up for people in a lot of ways that they're not aware of. And it would be very unseemly to have gotten rid of it under the circumstances of it being what it actually is, as opposed to what it's been portrayed to be by politicians who have some axe to grind and something to benefit by having you really not know what it is and by getting rid of it. It just doesn't make sense to do that. So our question today would be, what does being Jewish have to do with DEI? And to help us with all things Jewish, we have one of my favorite people, I have to tell you, in the world, who is Randy Gold. Now, Randy was my student 30 something years ago, and we have been hanging together ever since in ways that are so surprising even to me. For instance, Randy was the one who introduced me to the reenactment every year of the March Across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. On something like the 35th anniversary, he called me and said, "Would you be interested in going with me?" And I said, "Yes, but how come you know about this and I've never heard of it?" And he said, "Oh, well, we take a bus every year. My synagogue takes a bus to it, and we march across the bridge for part of this commemoration." So we went, and he took his son, and I took my granddaughter, and 15 years later, he calls up again and says, "You ready to go again?" And we go, and it's the 50th anniversary of it. Our children were now grown up, much bigger. No, the first time we didn't have them at all.
First time
Yeah,
was just
first time we didn't have them at all. This time they were 8 years old. And they both started, or they graduated from high school. Both graduated from high school last year, started college. Um, my granddaughter started college at the University of Georgia. Randy's son took that 1 year to be in Jerusalem, and he ended up in Israel, and he ended up starting the University of Maryland 2 weeks ago. So we've been hanging in there for a long time. I was at his wedding. I was at the bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah for all of his children. He's got two daughters and a son. He recommended me for a national teaching award that I got. He was told me that he had done something really significant. It's the Beckman Award, and it's based on somebody doing something, somebody that you taught doing something really significant, and saying that part of the reason that they were able to do that was because of something they got from you. Now, I have to tell you that I've just told you all of that. But when Randy sat in my class, I had no clue who he was, except he was this kid who sat by the wall. And I don't know, Randy, I don't know if you raised your hand the whole time we were in this law class together. And for some bizarre reason, at the end, last day of class, they hand in their finals, and for some reason that I don't even know why, I just flipped through. I started flipping through finals, and I see this note at the end of his final, talking about how impactful the class had been for him, and how it stretched his mind in ways that he really was surprised about. That From that time on, we sort of have grown together. He tells me all sorts of stuff. I have celebrated Jewish holidays with him and his family. He's taught me so much about that. And I know how he thinks about these issues really expansively and how much they are a part of the work that Jews do in the world because of their religion and how they feel about how you deal with and treat other people. So I thought it would be really wonderful to have Randy on to talk to us about the intersection of those two things and what this January 20th executive order ends up doing, if anything, to the issues that he cares about and is concerned about in his own community, and how those may intersect with what happens in other um, parts of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So, Randy, thank you so much for accepting my invitation to come.
wow. What an introduction! I have to say, it has been years of friendship, just beyond professor and student.
Yeah.
Still, it is professor and student because I learn so much in every conversation that we have, and I'm honored that you guys even thought to include me in this conversation. I'm a little bit nervous that I'm the resource for everything Jewish because there might be a few things that I don't know.
You're only joking, although you do know a lot. Yeah,
we know all about that.
we understand you don't. Yeah, we know about being a monolith, right?
There you go.
We understand that you're not speaking for every Jew that ever drew breath, right?
Oh, no.
But
That
I
I
should
do.
say, Randy is not only Jewish by birth, but he is. What do you call it? Modern Orthodox.
Yeah,
Modern Orthodox.
it's modern Orthodox.
And he can tell you what that means and how you end up dealing with that in the world in ways that are surprising even to me for something as simple as going out to lunch. But also he cares about issues, and that's why, Randy, you're not on here just because you're Jewish. You're on here because I have seen for 30 plus years your walk in the world dealing with these issues from a Jewish perspective, right? I have seen you. This is such a good example of it. When George Floyd happened, you remember this? When George Floyd happened, Randy called me, and on the line was Nathaniel, his son, who was 14 at the time. And Randy said, I called you because Nathaniel wants to know what we can do to show our support for what's happening and the fact that we don't like what the response was, sort of administratively. So we had this really wonderful conversation. Nathaniel ends up a few minutes or a little while later that evening, I get this text message with a photo. Nathaniel had been told to go out in the backyard and pick up, I don't even know what you call these, the little burry thing fall off the trees, hickory nuts or something. And he had done it, but he didn't feel like throwing them away. So there was a bag of them. He put on the front lawn of their very nice community. Okay. I can't breathe.
Yeah.
I can't breathe.
Spelled it out in these little
And yeah, he had spelled it out with these little hickory nuts and put a sign saying something like, we believe in justice or justice lives here or something like that. And there was a picture. In the picture, he was standing by what he had put out there on the lawn. And I remember you texting me and saying, I'm a little nervous because I'm not quite sure how our neighbors are going to take this. And lo and behold, they loved it and ended volunteering to donate more yard signs because there were other people who wanted them. Okay. That is an example, just such a great example of what I've seen you do in terms of your walk through the world. When the title was 6, I still have the video that he did when he was told to give a book report. And it could be on anybody he wanted it to. He loved baseball, so he made it on Jackie Robinson. He couldn't understand why, if you loved baseball and you appreciated what baseball was, why you wouldn't love Jackie Robinson. He couldn't understand the idea that Jackie Robinson had experienced such racism over the years because he was such a good player. I had watched you. I mean, the thought that he would make that his report and have that part in it said a lot about the work you had done, you and Caroline, your wife, Caroline. And then to watch him now, all of your kids just, live with what you have taught them and passed on. That's why you're here, because you don't just walk the walk, you talk, you don't want to talk, you walk the walk every day. It's a part of your life. And I knew that because of that, that even if you weren't directly involved, because this isn't your job, right? You're an accountant who does all sorts of management stuff with accounting, and you can talk about that. But this just on an everyday, how we go through the world level, is what you do. And I know you would be impacted by this. And the truth is, we haven't even talked a lot about it since the election, about how it impacts this. But I know it does because I've watched her walk for 30 years. And I know it would have some sort of impact.
Yeah. For sure. Well, it sounds like really we should have Nathaniel sitting here instead of me, because he's the one that's, I say next generation, and that's really what's going to make a difference. Our conversation here is important, but what happens with that next generation is even more important. But I will say, I consider myself first a husband and a dad, and that's the most important part of how I describe myself. And so, as you're talking about Nat, that reinforces to me that maybe I've done a couple things right. And that's where I want to really focus. Look, we can all be known for doing wonderful things, whether it's teaching or podcasts or books or accounting or whatever. But when it comes right down to it, we're all human beings. And our responsibility that we have to each other and to our children and to our grandchildren is what really makes the world a better place. And for me, growing up Jewish, we absolutely believe in a responsibility that in Hebrew is called tikkun olam, which means to repair the world. And no matter when in history we're talking about, whether it's modern day or whether it's 500 years ago, there are always opportunities to repair the world because the world is just broken in so many different ways. We feel it intensely today because it feels like our world is so fractured and aggressive and angry. But I don't think that's unique. It just happens to be the time in which we're living. So for Jewish history, Jews have been engaged in the process of tikkun olam, repairing the world. I had a very, very dear friend who spent the majority of his life working in Africa to feed those who were suffering from a drought and famine in Burkina Faso. Had nothing to do with Judaism. But for him, that was his expression of tikkun olam, repairing the world. And in the context that we're talking about today, as it relates to DEI and what has changed in the current administration since January 20th, I feel I'll say maybe even a nervousness about where we're headed. I think we're all very, very anxious, but you'll remember a very famous poem about first they came for the academics, and then they came for the gypsies, and I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but then they came for me, and there was nobody left.
Nine Muller.
And we share, no matter who we are, no matter what demographic we are, we share that exact same story. They don't just come for the Jews. They don't just come for the blacks. They don't just come for the gays. They don't just come for the Catholics. It doesn't matter what your label is. Somebody's coming for you. And for me, when I think of DEI, I think of it in the same context of we are a humanity that has to take care of our collective selves. And for the Jewish people, that really is a responsibility. We Jews say that you don't have to make sure that you fix the problem, but you can't ignore the problem. You can't let that problem sit and not do something about it.
Right.
So we do have a responsibility. And don't get me wrong, Jewish people are just like every other group of people across the political spectrum. There are certainly right-wing Trump supporters, and there are left-wing Bernie Sanders supporters, and there's everything in between. What I'm bringing to this conversation as a Jew is my own personal belief that is not based in politics. It's simply based on what is the right thing to do. And that's where I want to be able to lead my children towards a thought process of how they will act as they grow and what they're responsible to do. maybe some of this conversation, and maybe you've in other podcasts had a conversation about what does DEI even mean today? Because it means so many different things to so many different people. And, DEI is 3 letters. It's become a 4-letter word to a lot of people.
Mhm.
And why? Why has it become that? And like so many other things, I think in today's world where social media can define how we see something. Because social media is so easy. It doesn't have to be based in fact. It can be based in opinion. And if you're not getting to the root reality or the news, the facts behind it, it becomes the reality. And so in many circles, DEI has just gotten a bad name. I hate to say a bad reputation, but just thrown out the window because it, for whatever reason, is not fair to another group of people or leads to substandard work product, something like that. And I just think if we allow that narrative to guide how we understand DEI, we've already lost. Because you can't overcome an untruth in that way. I mean, look, we've seen it so many times. What's out there on social media, and it's absolutely not true, but there's still people who believe it, right? So, for me, I'd love for the conversation, for us to sort of take back the conversation and own a conversation that DEI, in its purest sense, not a bad thing. It's a good thing for all of us, and everyone can benefit.
Everybody.
And if we don't understand why you, as someone who's not, I'll say, directly benefited by DEI, if you don't understand because you feel like you're not directly benefited, you've misunderstood what DEI is about. Because there is a direct benefit, even if it's a different thought process or a different way of looking at the world. Collaborative minds together are so much more powerful. And to be surrounded by the same group of people who are going to make a decision means you don't see all the options in front of you. So you might say, oh, DEI doesn't apply to me. I'm a white guy. What do I need DEI for? You've missed the boat. You don't understand what DEI really is about. And, in that sense, Dawn, I think you have a great explanation for how DEI has sort of been overtaken by folks who have defined it as something that it really isn't. And I think that's so important for you to share, here. And then I'd love to sort of expand on that a little bit as it relates to the Jewish piece.
Yeah.
That's what we'll talk about on this one. I'm so glad that you said that very thing because that's exactly what this is all about. We're taking back the use of what CRT means, what does woke mean, what does DEI, gosh, I don't know why I couldn't say it for a second. It is not a 4-letter word like you feel viscerally like it is, right? Every time someone yells it out, every time they talk about it on the news. But the point that we're trying to make is it's not anything that you have to pay for. It's not anything that you have to be drugged through the streets and, we're going to tar and feather you if you don't enjoy it. It's not anything like that. It's all about just talking about the differences between us and asking you to see that, just to see the difference.
Yeah.
And hopefully your actions will be different moving forward. But, that's why we're going to continue to have these conversations until we get it through to each and every person's head that this is exactly what DEI is.
I think you're right, Randy, that the conversation was taken over by people who did not understand it, who wanted to misuse it. When basically, bottom line is, we're talking about just respecting everyone for what they bring to the table, for what it is they bring to the table. That's all we're talking about. And what we have learned through our entire life growth process is that there are some people that we don't value, that there are some people we don't need to listen to, that we don't need to include, who don't need to belong. And when you get into a workplace, which is always my context, okay, employment law, I would love for it to be everywhere, but the law is with employment law, right? I would love for it to be there, but for people to be there, hired to do a job, and to feel excluded doesn't make any sense to me because that ends up manifesting itself in all sorts of ways. It's not just you feel excluded, so woe is me. I got my feelings hurt here. You're talking about who you're going to give a promotion to. First of all, who you're going to hire, who you're going to think is worthy of being hired. Who do you think is a contributing member that can hire? And once they're there, what that experience is like for them. Are they going to be given the assignments they should? Are they going to be unduly chastised or raked over the coals or evaluated in ways that are very different? All of which I have seen happen 8,000 times over in workplaces, both from the employee's point of view as well as from the employer's point of view, where they realize the mistakes that they were making or allowing their managers to make by not valuing what you have hired to do your work. It ends up giving you less of what you hired that person for. You end up without having the kind of work product that you should have. Because the truth is, we all work better when we feel like we're contributing members of the organization and we're trying to help move it forward. It just does. It just sort of operates in a different way in our brain. We are much more imaginative, creative, collaborative when it is that we feel included, as opposed to having to use, without really thinking about it, so much of our energy just to maintain, just to be here because we're getting the message that we're an outsider. That part that you talked about in terms of all of us being able to benefit from that, whether you were white male or not. And we specifically, and I'm sure this is true for you, say white male, because that seems to be the one that has the biggest complaint about why there should not be DEI, because somehow they are left out. I heard somebody say this, and I thought about these things for the past 43 years. So thinking about it in a new way with somebody coming up with something different, it doesn't happen as often as I would love for it to. But I heard somebody the other day say, not liking DEI because you think you feel excluded because you're a white male is like coming to somebody's funeral and saying, their dad's funeral, and saying, well, my father died too. It's like, okay, I'm real sorry your father died, but that's not this funeral, right? That's not what this is about. DEI, and I like to add the B to it, the belonging piece. It is about groups of people who have traditionally been excluded from a workplace now being included. And I'm saying DEI as opposed to something like affirmative action, because DEI is not a law mandated kind of statutorily based concept. I'm trying to think of it because it's not a law. It was what people used in order to do the law. The law said you can't discriminate on the basis, Title VII, you can't discriminate on the basis of, race, color, religion, gender, national origin. So people started hiring people. Affirmative action said if you're going to have government contracts, then you've got to, as we're the government, we have to set the example, we have to be the role model. We don't want you to discriminate in your workplace if you're providing services or goods for us. Okay. And if you do it over a certain amount of money, $50,000, then you actually have to set up a plan that if it shows that you have essentially been doing that, you have to sort of set up sort of a way of thinking about how to approach that problem and do something with it. And I love what you said about you don't have to fix the problem, but you can't ignore the problem. That's a wonderful piece because ignoring it isn't helpful at all. So you make a plan for how you're going to deal with it and you try to move toward that. And it's called goals and timetables. And you barely hear about that anymore, but that's still a legal concept that's alive. That has not been killed in the workplace. the Supreme Court addressed it in the context of college admissions, but that has nothing to do with the workplace. But again, the law says you can't discriminate. They say further, if you're a government contractor, you can't discriminate. People started hiring people. And then they realized, okay, we hired them. We invited them to the dance, but ain't nobody dancing with these folks. Okay, they're here, but that's all they are. They're here. We're not using them. We're not including them. We're not valuing them. And they're getting that message. So, of course, you had a lot of people who were leaving too, because it just didn't feel good to be there in a place where you did not feel valued. None of us would want to be in a place like that. That's where DEI came in. And for me, it was absolutely, and this was before anybody named what this was, it came from me doing consulting sessions where people would talk to me and tell me why they made the decisions that I knew would get them in legal trouble. And I'd say, okay, why is that what you decided to do with that? And they would tell me, and I realized it was because of what they were dealing with in their head, not because they didn't know that you weren't supposed to discriminate. It's just that their ideas about certain groups of people told them this isn't discrimination. It's not discrimination if I say I'd hire you, but pay you 50% more if you were a man. I'm giving you a compliment. Okay, that's about what's in your head. You knew you weren't supposed to discriminate, but you didn't think you were doing it. That's where I came to the concept of we need to address this if we're going to make the law work, right? Because it's not just getting them in there, it's making sure that they are there and they're going to be treated in ways that don't get the employer in trouble for discriminating. And that ended up being DEI. Years later, it turns into what we now know as DEI. So it never came from a place of exclusion. The reason it wasn't directed specifically toward white males was because they simply did not have the background, the history that said you are excluded from this workplace because of the color of your skin or because of your gender in the case of women. So, you know, your journey through that workplace has been quite different. Your journey to be able to be in that workplace has been quite different. So you don't need the same thing to address it, which is what equity is all about, right? You give what the person needs for their specific issues. If you don't have discrimination as an issue, then we don't need to deal with you with discrimination. We may need to deal with you in some other way, but discrimination.
Okay, great. So we're back. And what I appreciate that you were saying, Donnie, is recognizing that there are so many ways that DEI has been misunderstood and how actually that transition helped to people come with the misunderstanding of it because they think of the affirmative action first. And then they're thinking that this is a new thing on top of that, that all employers have to juggle all of this going on. And that's not it. That's not it at all.
All of which, of
It's
course, is to keep them out, right? Because that's where the pushback comes from, and it was never to do that. It was
right.
never to do that.
Mhm.
Now, were there people who did it? Yeah, there were lazy folk who didn't know what to do, didn't want to spend the time to figure out what does this law actually mean? What are we supposed to do here? That took that easy way. And what I love about what you picked up about it, Randy, is that ended up being what carried the day, right? These people who had misunderstood what they were supposed to do, did the wrong thing that the law never asked them to do, the DEI was never about, and they ended up running with that. And then on January 20th, by executive order, trying to cancel it out, that and all the other subsequent memos and rules that they've put in place and laws all over the states. It took on a snowball effect, of course, because it's so insane. It's like, oh, well, if we're going to do that, then, we ought to stop teaching this history. We ought to stop having these books. We have, this Park Service, U.S. Park Service installation that's about something like slavery, where we go in the bookstore and take out all the books in the gift shop that have anything to do with slavery because that's a divisive concept. Just insane. insane the way it worked. And what you said about how incredibly important it is to have that diversity of views, we think bears that out. In your own family, you can figure that out. If every single person in that organization, in that group, feels the same way, thinks the same way, then you're never going to get any real innovation because you're all just feeding off of each other. It becomes an echo chamber. That diversity broadened out, that began to include everybody, included people who had ideas that were not used, the ones you may have been used to hearing. They may have been given to you in a way you're not used to seeing, right? Like finding out that neurodivergent people have a way of thinking about things that may not be the way you think about it, but it's a perfectly good way. And in fact, was a really good idea. Uh, 2 nights ago, I was at a board meeting where there was no diversity on the board, and except I was sitting in the room, as a guest. And as it turns out, you could see the impact that that lack of diversity had, because basically everybody in the room was saying the same thing. I walk in with a lifetime of different experiences, different gifts that I would bring to an organization like that. And I'm looking at the stuff they're doing and thinking of it in ways that would be wonderful for them to do what they want to do. They simply hadn't thought about it because they're not me. They don't have my experience. Everybody in there basically had the same experience. So they're going to keep getting the same kind of approaches, which isn't helpful if what you want to do is extend out. So the concept was misused. It never excluded anyone. It was only dealing with what it was you needed to have addressed. If you didn't need to have addressed, there was no reason to have it addressed. And that ended up becoming why people ended up, or I should say first, why politicians were able, with their platforms, to create that wedge and really exploit it, and why people listening to that would walk away with the wrong idea of what any of this was, which is
Right,
why
because what
I
you're
said about having, it's so important to get that word out there. That's what we're trying to do by having the podcast, because we understand all those other voices are out there mischaracterizing it. And the truth is, we're talking about January 20th, but this is not about politics at all. Let me say this. It shouldn't be about politics, except that it has become a political thing that we're having to address in the context in which it arose. That's the only way that it's about politics. I want whoever is the head of our country, whoever is the head, I don't care what party, I want whoever is the head of our country to do well. I want them to flourish, to do all the things that we think should be done to make the country great the way you talked about people being great. And it's really no different. Having what you want for your family, broadening it out to a country. But the truth is, having these kinds of discussions become political is almost a given when you use politics as a weapon to get rid of the kind of things that get in the way of us being able to treat each other well.
So I think you're saying something really important here as it relates to the political realm, and I I have feet in lots of different communities. I may have 2 feet, but I have them in lots of communities. So whether it's the Jewish community, the business community, you know, the Atlanta community, the my dearest love, Georgia Bulldog football team, or I feed in lots of communities, um, and we live in an imperfect world, and it doesn't matter what community my foot is in at the time. There are people on both sides of every single issue out there. And one of the things that I learned from you, Dawn, is when there's an opportunity to educate, maybe identifying an opportunity to educate, because maybe before I learned that, I would just get angry at someone who seemed to have this off the wall, completely not understandable. Someone that would say they want a better price on something, so they're going to Jew them down. That would make me angry, but they probably don't even know what they're saying. So it's an educational opportunity. And I wonder if we could take this conversation out of the political realm and we could look at the extremes of people who are on opposite ends of DEI, because the three of us are very much in the center of this conversation. And you've got folks who want to outlaw DEI, and then you've got folks who want to interpret DEI as almost an entitlement opportunity to, the government says I can, therefore you have to, And I see an educational opportunity on both sides. And I think if we miss the conversation on both sides, then it doesn't matter how much we try and educate one side. If we haven't educated the other, they're still going to be at polar opposites. And while I think we have a long way to go in the political realm, I always find that if we can do this, which is have a conversation, regardless of where you are on the spectrum of, I'm so in on DEI that, I think I should get everything I want, or I'm so against DEI that I wouldn't give you an inch. If we can have conversations about that outside the political realm, then I think we can make a difference. And I wonder where the opportunities are for that. Because if we ignore that educational opportunity, as opposed to just pushing back on the political realm, I don't think we ever get to make a difference, because the way politics are going in this country, the repair of the political realm to what is a more bipartisan effort will take generations from where we are today. And again, this is not a comment about Republican or Democrat. It doesn't matter who you are. You just want to find a gotcha with the other side. And there's not a lot of bipartisan effort. So to get there will take a long time. But the educational opportunities on both sides might bring some of those folks that are not in politics closer to a better understanding of what DEI really should be for, how it should be implemented, how it can benefit all different kinds of people. And I'd love for us to figure out where those opportunities are.
But Randy, we're not concerned about that, which is exactly the way it should be, right? That's the way it should be. The politicians have allowed, not just because it's not even the politicians that started this; they've jumped on the bandwagon for sure. But they're the movement, the whatever that engine is that's behind all of that to get my people this way, which is in this case Republicans, was to take these words that belong to us, to take your fear and to take my words and use your fear to turn them against me. And then politicians pick that up because, oh, look at it. Look at the whole community over there. They're all excited. I need those votes. So I'm going to add to that. Just going to pile on and make everything about what they say. Because, there's like sometimes they use the letters DEI and it doesn't even have any business in that. I mean, it's like the conversation is about milk. Oh, yeah, that's those DEI cows. What? It's become so ridiculous. And then the other side is, well, I understand what it means. I know exactly what it means. I'm benefiting from what it means. But I'm just going to keep telling you what I want you to do, what I want you to hear, so that you can continue to do what I want you to do.
So
And
I
that's
don't
the
know.
attitude.
I don't know if you know this, but I heard this just the other day. Slavery wasn't that bad. Did you know that? Slavery wasn't that bad. And so, why is it necessary in the Smithsonian museums to harp on this idea that slavery was a bad thing. We're never going to be able to fight a battle with an administration that wants to control what the Smithsonian Museum displays. That's an unwinnable battle. But I think a conversation with people who want to attend that museum, are curators of that museum, are funders of that museum, people who have an understanding of history, right? Historians, decent people who understand the idea that slavery wasn't that bad is the dumbest comment you could possibly make. But, Don sort of alluded to this earlier. If you're going to change what's in the museum, we can't win that discussion. We can only win in an educational setting where we take the opportunity not to educate the politicians who Renee, as you said, have a prerequisite once they get elected to get reelected, right? They're just going to say what they think their constituents want to hear. But if their constituents are educated on all of these issues, maybe they're the ones who make the difference for these politicians, as opposed to us trying to make the difference in the politician's mind, because they got to get reelected. So you got to change the base thought that comes from their voters, their constituents. And one of the reasons I think that you've got people polarized in this country on every topic, right? It could be gun control, could be LGBT, it doesn't matter. One of the reasons that you're so polarized is because the law of physics that says every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So it doesn't matter how left you are, there's going to be someone that is that much to the right and vice versa. And it's up to us to figure out how to bring those people more to the center on all of these social fabric conversations. One of the most important, which is DEI. And Dawn, you added the letter B, which actually did turn DEI into a 4-letter word. So I don't know if that's good or bad. But the concept of belonging is actually not one that I've heard before. Oh. And I find that to be something that should be comforting to everyone, right? You don't want to be around a group of people where someone doesn't feel like they belong. That's a very uncomfortable gathering, right? But I'll even tell you from my own experience, and we've talked about this in the past. I think it's the musical Avenue Q, where there's a song, everyone's a little bit racist. Even in the back of your mind, in the recesses of whatever's in your brain, everybody's always got some little bit that they can't get exactly right about another group. It makes me a little uncomfortable when I go to a presentation. This happened recently. There were 20 different speakers, and every one of those speakers identified themselves with their name and their pronouns. Doesn't matter to me what your pronouns are. Doesn't affect me. I don't need that. To me, is actually an intimate part of your life, but it was important to them that they have the respect of being addressed the way they want to be addressed. And out of those 20 or so speakers, there was only one person who had pronouns that were different than what you might have imagined when you saw them, saw their face. But I was a little bit uncomfortable with the idea that you go to an event and now you feel the need to tell me what your pronouns are. So that might be my own challenge, where I myself could be educated as to why that is something that has almost become the norm, right? In a business setting, it happens a lot. It doesn't happen very often, but it happens. Is that a direction that we think most of the country is going to be comfortable with? I think the answer to that is probably no, but maybe that's an educational opportunity, even for somebody like me, who absolutely believes in the aspects of DEI and belonging. Because I see this question of my pronouns are as more of this question of belonging, because they want to feel that they are addressed appropriately, whoever they are. And I think that getting comfortable in today's world with something that is not as we grew up with the rules from the 1950s, right? That women are in the workplace today in more numbers than men, or just as equal numbers to men, even though they may not be paid equally. Like, we're not living in the 50s anymore, and it's okay to be a little uncomfortable. And if you are, our job as people who care is to provide that degree of education when there's a teaching moment.
Well, I'm all over that. And I love it that you love that approach because, and this is a constant sort of tension between me and Renee on the show. If we had our choice, Renee would have an opinion show where we just come on and just lambast what happened in the week before. I mean, we could just go to town on that.
Invite me to that show, because I want to do that.
And for me, and I think it's probably because of my grounding in being with thousands of people who do not know, and realizing I can help you with that. We can talk about it and give you an educated basis for your decision. My preference is to have that, because for me, I have preferences. I would prefer for you to really think DEIB is okay, but the truth is, your opinion is your opinion. I don't have any control over that. You get to have whatever thoughts you want to about it. What I care about is that when you make those opinions, they're made on the basis of fact.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, I got to give you I got to give you an educational basis for it. So my preference for a podcast is to have people come on who present what their piece of this is. And then you now know more about that piece, and you have more upon which you can base your decision. I would love to tell you how to think about it, but the truth is, this is how I think about it. I'm now providing you with information you may not have known, like about the Jewish community, and even something like Tikkun Alam.
Close enough.
I got it. Close enough. Being a part of what makes you have the walk that you have in the world, that would make you concerned about these kinds of issues. And that's a very different approach, because it would be so much easier to get on and just scream and yell about what I don't like that has happened in the past few days, right? Because we all got opinions about that stuff. But for me, your idea of what that is yours. As long as it's factual, I'm okay with it. But my experience has been that for most people, it's not factual. It's based on a piece here, a piece there, a politician, something you heard, a headline you saw, and it turns out that wasn't right at all because somebody was misrepresenting it. I think the other thing that's really important too, Randy, is what you said in terms of how it is that we handle those things, because everybody is going to do it differently, right? And that's okay to do. It's just that when we're all in a workplace together, how we do that is going to have an outcome. And what we want is going to have a consequence that we are okay with. And things like pronouns is a really good example of that. And it reminds me that one of the sources of discomfort here is that none of this was something we learned in school. Well, I taught employment law, but everybody didn't take my employment law course, right? And even in that, there are things that we didn't cover. We didn't cover, DEI is really just sort of not the course. I mean, it's employment law, not DEI. We didn't have a time when we all learned, oh, this is what we're supposed to be doing now. Okay, there's this new concept called DEI. Where were we supposed to learn that? We usually, if anything, we learned it through a workplace, right? Where somebody decided to have some programming around it. Or we heard it from a politician. Okay, those are basically the two sources where we heard it. And what we hear depends on who is saying it and what that experience was. I can't tell you the number of people corporations who have called me and said, we had somebody come in and do some programming. It was horrible. We just want to make sure that doesn't happen again. And it was like, that's not how I roll. Okay. You don't walk away from my stuff saying it was horrible. What you walk away with is saying, oh my God, I didn't know it could be like that. That was actually fun. Right. That becomes a really important piece, because if you don't have something like a law passed that says this is what we're all doing now, then you're left up with the bits and pieces of how somebody interprets it. And those interpretations, and the pronouns is a really good example of it, can have all kinds of repercussions. Pronouns came out of what? I can't even tell you. And this is what I do. Other than knowing, this is what I call the sibling effect, right? Where if you grew up with a sibling, either the younger one or the older one, if you were the younger one and you saw the older one doing something or getting something you didn't have, you were going to jump up and say, why not me? Why aren't you giving this to me? And it could be something like getting your learner's permit, right? Well, you didn't let me get my learner's permit. How about there's an age limit on this, right? You don't even qualify for it. Well, that doesn't matter. That is what happened with this stuff, right? And it's happened all through the civil rights movement. One group saw what was happening with one group and they said, well, what about us? Women, LGBT folk, we have issues too. You shouldn't treat us wrong. And I'm not mad at that. That's okay. It's just that you can't expect us all to be in the same place about those issues that you've now brought up if we don't have any grounding in them. And especially when you're dealing in a cancel culture. A couple of summers ago, somebody used the word, it was one of the words for disabilities in a song. And I can't remember what the word was. But one of the songs was Lizzo. The other one was from Houston. This married to
Beyonce.
Beyonce. Okay,
Right.
both of them used it in a song, and I think the word was spaz. The word was spaz, I think. And with the cancel culture that we had, rather than just educating, right? What somebody did was called them out. It became this whole social media thing. They changed they literally changed their songs, right? Re-recorded them, taking that out, and then made like donations and stuff. And people were still screaming. It's like, wait a minute, I don't understand. First of all, nobody taught me about all this stuff. So I don't even know. Nobody told me that was a word I wasn't supposed to say. So I said it. You called me out on it. I told you, I'm so sorry. They apologized to the community, and they're both very supportive of diverse communities in and of itself. That's a big deal, right? So they were supportive of the communities. They made apologies, all of that, and they were still getting called out for it. And I'm like, I'm still stuck back at, how are we supposed to know this? Like, why would you call us out like that? Especially when there's nothing that told us we were supposed to be doing this in the first place. Educate us. Tell us. Use that as a teachable moment. Say, what? I noticed you use this word, spam, in your thing. Let me tell you why that's not a good word. And I bet you wouldn't have used it if you had known this. Okay. They could have done what they needed to do after that. But instead, and I don't mind the discomfort. Okay. I mean, that's just a part of the learning process. Right. And I'm not talking about the kind of discomfort where you have to take certain books off the shelves because they say your children are going to feel uncomfortable if they know slavery existed and it wasn't a good thing. Okay. That's nonsense. But for me, being able to extend both the space for people to learn and the grace while they are doing it becomes such an important piece. Because if you knew that your discomfort at hearing that at that meeting, and you must go to a meeting of some kind every day and night with all those feet you have in all those different groups in Atlanta, but your discomfort would have been greatly lessened. But as it was, you just didn't even have any background for what this was and why everybody was getting up here and doing it. And when all of a sudden were we supposed to know to do this? And you are somebody who actually cares about these kinds of issues. Teachable moments are really important. And hopefully that's what our podcast is. It is providing information for people so that they can go out and make their decision about whether they think DEI should die or not, as opposed to having it imposed upon them without them realizing how much and what it actually affected.
You know, it's interesting that you chose that example of the word spaz. I have a daughter with significant special needs. She has a very rare genetic disease. And very often people will use the word that's so retarded in a sentence or retard or whatever. They may not know me. Sometimes they do know me and they use that word. And I use it as an opportunity just to educate them because otherwise, like you said, when we were growing up, that was the word you described to tell the kid on the football field who dropped the ball that he shouldn't have dropped the ball. So if you don't know, you don't know. And that's where these teachable moments come into play. I don't know if you remember years ago, um, you led a discussion that I convened that was people from the Hindu community, the Indian community, from the Asian community, from the Black community. I think we actually had the Black MBA Association from Atlanta, and there was an Asian American Association, and also the Jewish community. And together, the topic of the conversation, this was probably the late 1990s, the topic of the conversation then was diversity in the workplace. Who was talking about diversity in the workplace in the 1990s the same way we were talking about it here? And I remember very clearly, I still have friends that I met through some of those interactions. I've been invited to the Hindu temple. Probably not that many Jews been invited to a Hindu temple. But those types of interactions are what lay the groundwork for the teaching moments, for the opportunity to say, let me tell you a little bit about this or that and why it might change the way you approach things. And I really feel like that's where we all can make a difference. If you go on to any of the news apps that we all use, whether it's CNN or Fox, or you're getting it through that lens. And if you don't understand that you're getting something through that lens and that you're either going to fully agree with it or fully disagree with it, if you don't get that, then you're going to miss the teaching moment because you're just going to be angry about what you read on the other side or happy about what you read on this side. And we're just so polarized today. If we could, on all of these issues, just figure out how to breathe, just bring it down for a second, and let's sit down and have a conversation. You know, go to the coffee shop, sit at a table, and have a conversation with somebody who disagrees with you. It doesn't mean that when you leave, you're going to agree. I don't think this is really about changing people's minds from a yes to a no, but it is about bringing more to the middle to have a conversation that can move an issue as important as DEI be forward in a way that will benefit America really in the long run.
Yeah, I think that you're exactly right, Randy, because the things that we want people to take away is the information. We also need it to be built in facts, right? If I give you all the facts and I give you the information and you still have a way of thinking about it that's different than the way that we think, then that's what it is. But now, when someone challenges you on what you think, you have more information. It's going to be harder for you to explain what you mean because now you know more facts. And you just can't unhear it, right? These facts exist. And then, especially if you decide to go and research them for yourself, guess what you'll find is true. And then now it challenges your whole thinking. That's why I think watching Fox News sometimes for me is important because I just got to hear what the other people are saying, where they're coming from. I want to understand their base of knowing what they think they know when they're talking about certain subjects. And I say by they, everyone, I mean the audience of Fox. I want to understand what their thoughts are, what they're coming to this thinking already, so I can ask the right questions because I want to know what you're thinking too. Why do you think that? Tell me what do you have that supports that information? How can I see it?
these kind of things seem to be real simple. I mean, if we learned about this in school, I remember doing critical thinking, having to write papers that required me to have critical thinking and to push against my own idea because that was required. What happened to that art? I don't know. It gets lost sometimes, maybe just by life, working hard, but you deal with it every day. We're always making decisions. So I agree with that 100%. What I'm struggling with right now, more than anything else, what I'm having a hard time keeping two thoughts in my head about this and converging them to where they become a real something that I can take away as a reality for me is what's happening now in our global world. Growing up, I was very proud to know about NAACP and then how we came together as a group of people that were from two different worlds, Jews and Black, and came together, even though we had a shared history on discrimination. And it was so important. And the learning that I got in school, I know you've had gone to college or, excuse me, high school, and you were taught about the Holocaust and all that. And then having that feeling of even more um, camaraderie with my Jewish friends, because now I understood their past too. We knew about slavery, but now I know about you. And that made for a more richer relationship, just like you were talking about going to the bar mitzvah and the bat mitzvah, and that makes a difference because now you have more information, and it's harder to hold in your head that why people would have a problem with this when you are all in it and you're like, fine, this is nobody's doing anything to me, right? But now with what's happening globally, I can't hold it in my head that what is happening with Israel and everybody else. I just weird to me because I never grew up like that. So um, that's a struggle since we're having this conversation about this. That's a struggle for me in my head. And since I have you here as the person that's all Jewish people, I need you to tell me what that is.
Um,
Uh,
I think what you're asking is about the situation in Israel today. I think that's what you're asking me about, and what's going on in Gaza.
yeah, mostly just as how can I hold it in my head, the two things? I know that there's all kinds of reasons why people have these things. I mean, I'm sure everyone feels that their reasons are valid. I got it. But my concern for me is that I grew up a certain way knowing something, and it's being challenged right now. And what do I do? You know how we always have these thoughts about what we would do if someone said this, someone did that. You kind of play it out in your head. I had never played this one out. This was never on my radar.
Right.
So I'm concerned about
So,
that.
we may be getting off topic from DEI here, and it may be a topic for a whole nother podcast because I see we're already at an hour, and we could talk for hours on this topic. But let me just see if I can address the question as briefly as possible. First of all, I think what you see most often on the news and on most topics is not always reality on the ground. And I also think what you see going on in Israel is very, very much a double standard that Israel, the Jewish people, Zionists are held to. And I say that because Russia took over Crimea in 2014. Russia invades Ukraine. They are bombing the capital city of Ukraine, Kyiv, as we speak. Look at what's going on in Sudan today. Look at what's going on in other places. And there is no outcry in this world. There is no outcry from the UN. There are no kids protesting on campus about what's going on, and there are thousands and thousands of people dying around the world in conflicts between countries other than what's going on in Israel. And on top of that, Israel very clearly over the years, go back to the Oslo Accords, go back to Ehud Barak in the late 90s, offered almost 100% of what the Palestinian people wanted for peace. When it came to land for peace, Ehud Barak offered 95%. And unfortunately, Israel has never had a partner for peace on the other side. And just yesterday, there was a shooting in Jerusalem and 6 people were killed by a terrorist. Israel lives surrounded by people that wants it annihilated. Hamas's charter is to annihilate Israel. Iran's constitution is to annihilate Israel. And let's not forget that Israel was attacked on October 7th, 2023, by people who were outside of its borders, came across the border and killed almost 1,400 people, many of whom were just at a music festival. Imagine if Canada decides to invade Vermont at a music festival, what's going to happen? And took more than 250 people, alive and dead, by the way, hostage. For what? And these people have been hostage now for almost 700 days. And Israel has been very clear. Their response is aimed at eliminating terror. Hamas is not a legitimate political organization. They're a terrorist organization, as indicated by many, many countries around the world, including the United States. Israel has said, eliminate terror and return the hostages. And it's very simple. Very, very simple. And Hamas has such a stronghold on what's going on in Gaza that even the good people of Gaza, and there are many, don't get me wrong, even the good people of Gaza are suppressed, shot, and killed when they rise up and say, hey, Hamas, look, we're hungry. We're starving. You're not helping the situation. And they try to rise up against Hamas. That doesn't get a whole lot of coverage, by the way, in the media. But how do you, as a country like Israel, continue to live surrounded by people who just want to kill you? Look at what's happened in Lebanon with Hezbollah. Look what's happening in Yemen with the Houthis. The Houthis fired a missile 2 days ago that hit a small airport in southern Israel. For what? Why? Can you imagine a small airport, somewhere in Texas, that Mexico just lobbed a missile and hit a small commercial airport? It doesn't make sense. And now I'm not
It's never
suggesting,
going to make sense for
I'm
sure.
not,
It's never. I don't think there's any way to make sense out of hate. I
no,
just don't think there's any way you can. And there's hate on both sides. There's hate on all 20,000 sides because is it 20,000 races? There are 20. Of course, there's several different genders. But the thing is that if you know, when you tell your kids just because you hit them back doesn't mean you're not in trouble too.
well,
Because if they hit you, you hit them back, and you're both in trouble because you're fighting, and you shouldn't be fighting. That's how we talk to our kids, right?
yeah,
And we want to take that out, and expand it to life in general. But the thing is that when you have our country talking about um, not helping people who are in need of help and supporting those that don't need help. It's just very convoluted, and it doesn't give anyone. I know I don't feel the peace. I think that this man keeps telling us that he's the peace president, but he keeps starting stuff and he keeps hurting people. And yes,
I really do know how it feels to have every day think somebody wants to kill you or is trying to. I'm feeling that right
Yeah.
now. So I think that we, of course, like you said, this is a much longer conversation. We got to, way back because I know you took us all the way back to the '90s. Or we can way before that, right? It's been a long time. I remember stuff when I was a kid watching TV, and it was so important to see the two leaders get together, and America was always facilitating that. That's
Well,
a
America's role in the world has changed. There's no doubt about it.
yeah.
But what I will tell you is to be a Zionist means to me that there should be a place in the world that belongs to the Jewish people, and Jewish people can feel safe. And that land existed at the time of Abraham. It did not become in existence after the Holocaust. There is a misnomer that, because of the Holocaust, the Jews have Israel. That is absolutely not true. And there have been
Isn't there a
Jews.
whole book written about it called
Yeah,
the Holy? I don't know. I can't remember what that was. Oh yeah, what about that? And it all of oh my
yeah.
gosh. Okay, yeah. So you're right. It's a much bigger
But
conversation.
I think the idea that death to Zionists, death to me, because I believe in a place for my people to have as their own the land of Israel, I think is off the pale. When people are chanting on college campuses from the river to the sea and they don't know what river or sea they are talking about, what they are saying is there should be no state of Israel, because state of Israel is between a river, the Jordan River, and a sea, the Mediterranean Sea. And we allow so many of these college kids on campus to fall into the exact same trap of ignorance that we were just talking about for people who are on opposite sides of DEI conversation. The degree of social media created ignorance is unbelievable. And I am not going to say that I agree, because I don't, with every action that the Israeli government takes. In the same way, I don't believe in every action the US government takes, regardless of who the president is. It doesn't matter. You're always going to have some idea of the president should have done something different, whether Republican or Democrat. And the same is true in Israel. I don't support every decision that's made. What I do support is Israel's right, and the fact that I have to say it. Like, who says America has a right to live in peace? Why do I even have to say Israel has a right to live in peace? That they should have to defend their border against people coming to kill 1,400 innocent people. And if, unfortunately, it requires getting rid of terrorism to take some of the steps that Israel has taken, if it means that the people of Israel get to live in peace, then unfortunately, that's sort of where you end up. And you can't tell somebody like Zelensky in Ukraine, just because Russia hit you, you're going to be in trouble if you hit back. It doesn't work that way when you are the one that is attacked and your people are constantly. I was just in Israel last year, and at breakfast in the hotel, a siren went off because there were incoming missiles. And for those of you who haven't been to Israel, it is an amazing country with very metropolitan cities, modern skyscrapers with architecture that you wouldn't even imagine. It is an incredible, incredible country. You wouldn't know what you would think you were in New York, standing on the streets in Tel Aviv. And I think it is terrible that there are people in Gaza who are starving and facing famine. It is not what anybody wants, not what anybody wants for those people. And there's a really easy way to stop it. And that is for Hamas to be demilitarized and to return the hostages, period. And there's a second option, which is the countries of Europe who now think it's appropriate to award Hamas a victory by saying now is the time for a Palestinian state, because if you keep acting bad, we're going to give you a state, is basically what the European leaders are saying. And maybe what they should be saying is, let's work together and make sure that we can feed these people who are in a famine situation. Because we, whether it's France, England, Germany, Canada, even Australia, Ireland, who have come out and said Palestinians need their state. At some point, I agree, a two-state solution is the solution. But to reward bad behavior and not first take care of the people that are suffering in need of food because of the situation caused by Hamas, I think it's sort of shame on the European leadership and other country leaders for not saying, we're going to come to the rescue of some of these people who are suffering because of what Hamas has perpetrated. And Israel, to its credit, has delivered aid. Now, I don't think they've delivered enough aid, and I'm not there on the ground having to put soldiers in front of trucks to defend the aid as it comes in. But my friends have kids that are on the ground defending those aid trucks that come in. And what that means is Israel is putting its own soldiers' lives at risk to deliver food aid to those that are starving in Gaza. And again, nobody talks about that. They only talk about, as they're marching on campus from the river to the sea, that Israel has caused a problem here. Let's not forget what the problem.
I don't never heard anybody say that.
Oh,
You
that
haven't
was
been
one
on
of their
the
I
rallying
never,
cries. That was
I
one of
never,
their rallying cries.
well, I'm
Let me
talking
just tell
about,
you.
I,
Let me just tell you. Last week was my son's first week of college, and on his very first day, he's walking to class, and he took a video to show me because he knew I wouldn't be able to believe it. As he's walking past, there are students in the quad waving a Palestinian flag, saying "From the river to the sea," and that's at the University of Maryland.
I bet he felt very welcome, didn't he?
yeah. But when I said that, I don't mean people don't that people don't think that. I'm talking about as official discussions. The anything that's happening that can be considered hate speech should be dealt with, but we're not doing that. You see, we can't.
This
The
is
problem
such
is
a whole different
I know, right?
discussion.
The
But
problem is so
seriously,
big that
one,
we can't
because
even
you
talk
gotta
about
go,
it.
and Randy, we promised you an hour. But there are two things I want to say. One, you're absolutely right about being able to bring people back to the table, and it is so doable. I did a thing between Turning Point, which, as you know, is a campus right extremist group, and the NAACP, both college on college campus, the college chapters, and it was on gun control. Okay, it was on the Second Amendment, and they had security there because they just knew it would go left because that's the way Turning Point likes to do, and that's not how I moderate anything. And when it ended, because I moderate the way I do, these students were crying. And it was the Turning Point people. And I said, "What's going on? Why are you crying?" And they said, "We didn't think this was possible.
Mm.
We didn't think it was possible." And I said, "You didn't think what was possible?" And they said, "We didn't think that we could actually sit down and have a discussion." Because when Bill does a debate, he was like, nah, it's probably not a good thing to do. Let's just talk about some stuff. When we finished, because it was done the way it was, with people being able to have time to talk, and you're not interrupting, and nobody's yelling and screaming and all that nonsense, they actually ended up learning stuff from each other. Exactly what you were talking about. You bring them together. One side sees what the other one, what you wanted to have happen. Tell me what it is that your thinking is, so I can understand why you have the position that I do. And I felt the same way. I wasn't crying over it, but I felt the same way on something that I never thought I would feel differently about. But when I heard their thinking about it, it made perfect sense, and I could see why they would think that. I don't know that I agree, but I could certainly see why they. Now, the other thing that's a really important piece is you sort of glossed over my girl Eden. Okay, ML4 is girl. Okay, and we don't really talk about this on the show, but Renee and I do a series. We've done a cozy mystery series that's based on DEI stuff. It's very strange. It's going to sound very strange. You just have to read them. But there's a quilt at the center of each one, and the quilt does something mysterious, which I know in and of itself sounds weird, right? But the quilt does something mysterious, and you can't figure out what's going on. And as you work out what's going on, you learn things about some diverse group that we're talking about in that particular book. We've done 4 now. You can find them online. It's the Quilt Journey Mystery Series. This one, did I pick up the right one? No.
I guess you was gonna say. I thought you were gonna say something about that one. But like, okay, where are we going?
This one, not all diamonds and gems, not all stars are in the sky. Eden's Quilt was a book that came to me to do based on Randy and his walk through the world and his daughter Eden, who has ML4. And this is one of the reasons why we do what we do, and even why these books were so important. Randy's daughter with ML4 is, and you can tell Randy the specifics about the disease, but she's basically way behind in terms of her development because of the disease. Basically doesn't really talk, walk like you would at, she's 15 or so now, right? Or
17 and a half already.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, that is amazing. But she's that's outside of the norm too, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's because you've been being so good with her. But Eden has never been able to develop the way a kid would normally develop. And in the book, Eden ends up, or in real life, when Randy wrote what he wrote that ended up with me getting an award, a National Teaching Award, the Beckman Award, I used that money, except for a contribution to your ML4 foundation, and we'll put a link in there for folks. I used it to create at the University of Georgia a scholarship for students who were doing diversity work of some kind to help build bridges of understanding on campus. In that sense, Eden, though she can't even speak as we would think of speaking, was the basis for students getting scholarships. And I love that. And that's part of what we talk about. The other piece is on Friday, I was on campus and I was at an event, the 40 Under 40 event. And somebody comes to me as it's over and I'm walking out and they say, "Are you Dr. Bennett Alexander?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, there's a student. Do you know this student?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Well, the student said, don't leave until they get here." So I said, "Okay, where are they? Like, what's going on?" I have no idea what's going on, right? So they call the student, and I don't even know this woman who's talking to me, right? She calls the student. The student says, "Okay, I'm here. Meet me at this place." And we walk out, and there she is. This student left class. Okay, she left class because she heard I was on campus and said, "I heard you speak in maybe my freshman year." I was so blown away until I ended up loving it and then found out you had a scholarship. And I heard you were on campus and I wanted to come here and tell you that I applied for your scholarship and I got it.
Wow.
Can we please take a picture together? All of that. That was because of that was Eden. And this is why, and Renee, one of Renee's big areas is disabilities. And you talked about just using even the word spaz. You just that's a word that doesn't make people feel like they belong. It doesn't really capture what Eden's bodily movements would be like or be valued as, right? But even though she cannot deal the way we would ordinarily think of somebody 17 and a half years old being able to, she has a huge impact, and I've seen it on everybody around her. She just makes people smile. And because of her, because of the work you did with ML4 that situated you to be able to apply to have me receive that award, other people are benefiting in a way she never could. Is that incredible or what? That's what valuing people for who they are gets you.
That is such a beautiful story, and
Yeah.
I love that you shared that. It means so much to me to know that Eden has touched so many people. I mean, she is really the catalyst behind the research that we're doing, and we've created a gene therapy for kids with ML4 in Boston at Mass General Hospital, and God willing, we'll be able to deliver that gene therapy, first ever treatment for this rare disease in 2026.
Amazing.
Kids suffering with this disease. She's also the catalyst behind another organization called JScreen. JScreen.org is the largest Jewish genetic disease screening organization doing preconception, not prenatal, preconception screening on partners that are looking to have children to see if they're carriers of the same disease and helping them understand what their options are if they both carry the same disease so that they can have healthy children. My wife Caroline and I created that organization based on our own experience with Eden, and it's really gone national over the past number of years. And then to hear how she's touching the lives of kids on campus at the University of Georgia who are interested in these topics. She really does have a broad reach for someone who
Yeah.
doesn't walk and talk and can't care for herself. She does make people smile.
And
It is
it's not just the University of Georgia campus. These students get that scholarship while they're there, but
Yeah.
as you well know, you don't leave that kind of subject matter when you leave the university. You go out and take it with you. They get my scholarship because they've been involved in doing diversity bridge building work, but they will never not do that work in some way, shape, or form. So Eden has gone far past the University of Georgia campus.
beautiful. That's
And
so
look at
beautiful.
and also internationally known because of the book. We have readers
Right.
that are in
That's
England,
right.
or I should say Europe, European readers all the time, and they one of the biggest books of that series. I mean, we put out the last two. I mean, not the last two, but those two together, Brian's Quilt and Eden's Quilt, at the same time.
Yeah.
Eden's Quilt gets picked up the most between those two books, so
Wow.
it's
Well,
really
they're great
exciting.
books. I encourage everybody to read them. There are now 4 in the series, and so you can get them on Amazon.com. I'll put in a
Oh,
plug.
and you gave us some more information. It wasn't just, we're bearing part of the lead here, Aunt Dorney.
Oh,
Didn't you tell us how we should start naming our books? The titles?
I may have. There was a whole conversation about that.
Mhm.
I absolutely think it's important to include that hook on the person's name. I
Mm.
think it makes it personal. And
mm,
Ryan's quilt, Eden's quilt, it's not just about a quilt, it's an
yeah.
individual person's quilt. And I think that
Yeah.
the stories that you've stitched together to include the language of the quilt, I think it's phenomenal, and it does make a difference to every person who in the book benefits from the quilt, and those of us who read it who benefit from the book.
Well, I'll
Do you
tell you one
remember
thing, as soon as we start making some royalties, you guys are in. You know.
do you remember when you sent me the picture of Shy, your middle daughter, reading the book? No, your baby daughter
Baby, yeah,
reading the book to
yeah,
Eden,
yeah.
reading Eden's quilt to Eden.
We do a lot of reading on the couch in my house, and sometimes we read to Eden. And the book that Chai decided to read was Eden's Quilt to Eden.
I love
Yeah,
it.
it was
Well,
beautiful.
Randy, thank you
That's
so much for
great.
spending time with
Yeah,
us.
we're
Thanks for having me. I appreciate
wonderful.
it.
I'm so glad that you came on and talked with us and gave us some real insights and education, like we talked about. And hopefully others are picking that up. I'm glad that you were able to speak for all the Jews so that we can get a better understanding of
All the Jews in the world.
you know, my neighbors too. I just talked to them. I said, I'm going to Randy. Talk to him. But yeah, it's been a pleasure, Randy. Of course, because your foot's over there. We know that.
Okay.
But it's really nice to talk to you today. Thank you so much for changing your plans to make it so that it can fit into the schedule. And
Happy. Okay. Thank you guys for having me. I really enjoyed it.
pleasure.